So I am the number one, the best in the world, the greatest of all time at making mistakes in portraits. No one's made more mistakes in portraits than me. Maybe you think you can challenge my throne, you can come at me in the comments, but for right now, I'm the champion of portrait mistakes. So I'm really well placed to make this video. And the first mistake that I've made a lot, and which you may have made too, is trying to get the answers before you know what the question is. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a math teacher, they come into the classroom and they just say to the students, kids, the answer is 4. Did the kids learn any math skills that day? No. And so if you come into portraits, you go, okay, I want to learn portraits. And instead of looking at a face, you just start thinking, okay, so there's this portrait method. Maybe it's the Loomis head or the Reilly rhythms or whatever other portrait methods are out there. You're jumping 2 steps or 3 steps. The first thing that you want to start to do if you want to learn how to draw people's faces is to start looking at people's faces. All right, so what do I mean by that? I mean making actual observations about what is happening in the face. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could be as simple as this. Hey, look, the forehead comes down, it kind of slopes forward. But then things come inwards, right here at the eyebrow line, before coming outwards again at the nose, inwards again. And then for the mouth, things come forwards and then back in, and then start to come forward a little bit for the chin, right? It doesn't even have to be that complicated. It could just be something like, here's the side of the head, and this is the front. The face is like the front of the head, and then there's the sides of the head. Where does it kind of turn that corner? Well, it's very rounded, so there's no specific corner, there's no sharp corner that's being turned. But on the forehead, that corner's being turned about here, you know, and if you want to place that a bit more here or a bit more here, I'm not here to tell you that there's right or wrong, it's a curve. So somewhere along this line, it's changing from being the front to the side. As we come down the face, here's where it seems to be turning. I can even see from the light and the shadow, it's turning along this line here. And even just noticing that this kind of front plane of the face is coming out on the cheeks, kind of wide, and it's a little bit narrower up here on the forehead. So the face kind of comes out like this with the cheeks, but then down up here, coming down on the forehead, it's a little bit kind of more narrowed in. Okay, so we're just making observations. What about if we come down the face, not right down the middle, but on this corner where it turned? As we come down, look, it all comes in at the eye socket. It comes in quite a lot before starting to come forwards again. Or if I go over the eyeball, I could come down here. Look, this goes over the eyeball in a kind of ball shape, and then it starts to come forwards. And actually, if I look at the eyelids, look at how do you ever think about the lower eyelid and observe, have you ever looked at the lower eyelid and really observed it and how this curve of the lower eyelid connects with that curve of the upper eyelid? And it makes sense because they're both wrapping over the eyeball that is wedged into the head. And then you can do stuff like looking at a skull and seeing these big eye sockets, much bigger than you might think, and imagining eyeballs in those eye sockets. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make observations about what we want to draw. What are the ideas here? And as you do these observations, it's really useful to not to focus entirely on the features, the eyes, nose, mouth. They get way too much attention as it is. Let's look at the cheeks. Let's pay some attention to the cheeks. You know, what's the form happening in the cheeks? And I'm not talking about, you know, some method here, Loomis and Reilly and Asaro or anything like that. I'm just saying, let's look at people's faces, lots of faces, and just try and think, you know, what am I seeing in this person's face? What is happening here? You know, so look at this plane of the chin, and then it kind of curves underneath to go into shadow down here. And I'm just looking at people's faces and observing them. That's why the first exercise in our portrait course isn't about drawing, it's about looking. And it's not about looking at, I'm going to tell you what to look for. It's about you starting to observe people's faces yourself. Look at how the planes change specifically. So as we go above the eye, and how this plane here is, how it kind of comes forward. It's kind of like a little ceiling here, right? Or what is the planes happening inside of the eye socket? What kind of forms are we seeing underneath the eye? How are these forms, how are they coming forward or coming back in or turning? Look at this, how this is kind of coming forward here. Wait, like this. There's a kind of little bulging form here along this line down to here. So we've got these lines, the nasolabial lines from the outside of the nose to the outside of the mouth. And then above that, we're getting this bulge on this lady here. We're getting this kind of bulging shape here, right? Like this. So we're trying to notice these ideas. And you know what? That bulging shape, I'm not seeing it on this reference as much at all. So different people's faces have different forms on them. And some of them are very, very similar across all different faces. And some are really different. And so it's really worth starting to notice all of these things. So the second big mistake that I see people make, and that I made more than anybody, right, is, all right, maybe we start with some kind of method. We'll start with like the Loomis head or whatever it is. But then immediately start going eyes, nose, mouth, and then just trying to paint the symbol of eyes and nose and mouth, like lips, however you imagine lips to be, just kind of painting these ideas straight onto the face. And so what you end up with is these portraits which kind of have these outlines for the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and they're very flat. And they don't really feel like a real face at all, right? And so the reason for this is, even if in our course and when I'm drawing portraits, I don't really start with a Loomis head. I use a couple of ideas from it, but I don't generally use much of the Loomis head. But it's a fine place to start if you want to. But the point is, it's an initial lump of clay that you can sculpt into. It's not all the form that you need, and then you can just start painting features onto it. You need to keep sculpting. Imagine you got a lump of clay, you're trying to sculpt a head. You get this ball, you're not just going to then like draw eyes on it. You're going to need to push the eye sockets in. You're going to need to sculpt out the form of the cheeks. You're going to want to look at how the mouth comes forward here, like this, right? So if I was sculpting this, I'd start with a big egg shape for the overall head, right? But then I would start to sculpt in like how this part of the mouth is coming forward like that. Or in the eyes, instead of just trying to do eyelashes, I would think about the eyeball first. Because how am I going to get how all of this works, how the eyeball looks, but also how the eyelids wrap over it, if I'm not first establishing that ball shape? So I go for the big, simple shape of the head, this kind of big egg shape. But then I want to start to sculpt into that. I'll put a simple block for the nose. I'll put that ball shape in this muzzle area. I'm trying to capture the ideas that I observed in that first part where we talked about looking at heads and faces. Now, I'm not going to go into the method that I like to use right now. I have another video for that. But the point is this: your mindset is to sculpt, and this is like the motto of our whole course, which I'm reminding students of every single lesson, is we're trying to, I don't know why I started small with an M, but we're trying to sculpt big to small. So the whole time we're thinking, what's the big overall form? And then we're going to sculpt some big ideas into that. And we're trying to leave the small stuff for much later in the process. We should not be thinking about we shouldn't be kind of going, okay, so the eye is like this, then there's these eyelashes, and then this, and then I'm going to go across here and do the other eye, and I'm going to do the eyelashes and the little details of the eye. That is not happening. It's going to be, we're going to get to that way late in the drawing process once we've sculpted everything else, once we have a really strong foundation to build onto. So the whole process is discussed in other videos, and you can learn it also in our course and stuff like that. And I'll link those videos below. But the idea is this: sculpt big to small, don't paint the features onto the head. So then the third mistake is rushing into teeny tiny value changes. So again, it's very similar to the first one, but let's say we're trying to lay down the shadow, the light and the dark onto our portrait. And you go, well, the eyelashes are dark, right? And the nostrils are dark. And you start doing all these teeny tiny little shapes. And then you go, well, this bit here is a bit lighter. So I'm going to put some like really, I'm going to put some light here because that bit's a bit lighter. But then over here on the eyelid, it's a little bit light. So I'm going to do that, and so on and so on and so on. And you start getting into these teeny tiny shapes of light and dark. When we're doing the values, when we're basically essentially shading our drawing, we want to think in the same way as we were when we were sculpting. So let's say when we were sculpting, we were like, we want to put down a sort of big, simple egg shape, and then we're going to sculpt into this big, simple egg shape. But we're going to start from here without any details, right? Maybe we'll just put the ear on or something like that. How would the values be on this big lump of clay? Right? They're not going to be, it doesn't have eyelashes and stuff yet. So how would they look? Well, let's say the light is coming in on the clay the same as it is on her head. Well, so maybe the shadows would be something like this. One side of the head would be in shadow, and the face plane would all be in light. And go, okay, cool. This is how you're going to build up your values, by thinking in these big, simple terms which correspond to the big simple forms that you used when you're sculpting out the face. So then let's say you push some eye sockets in and you put some eyeballs into those into the eye socket. Well, how is the shadow shape then gonna be adjusted? Because now we've got these ball shapes in here. And then let's say we did one on the mouth here. We added. How would the shadow fall on that ball shape of the mouth? Or on the chin, let's say. Let's say we put in a ball shape on the chin. How are the shadows going to fall now that we've added this next set of ideas? Or we'll put in a really simple kind of wedge-like nose. No nostrils, no details, just a bottom plane and a sort of side plane, like this. So then how would the light fall on this really simplified nose? And then how would that nose cast a shadow across the rest of the face? So we're going to build our values big to small, just as we sculpted the forms big to small. It's basically the same idea, but now just light is hitting. So here's the idea. In our portrait course, we have people for the first couple of exercises sculpting the face in terms of big forms to small. And when it comes to adding values like this, you'll see there's no features really. There's no nostril details, no eyelash details, no eye details, no lip details. It's not about the features. It's about the big underlying forms created by sculpting big to small, and then the values that those simple forms create. And then later we can get into the smaller ideas. But to be honest with you, when you get into the smaller ideas, there's a lot of risk that you're going to overdo it, over-exaggerate these little features, these little value changes, and it can easily go wrong from here. But you can see that you can establish a lot of stuff just with this kind of sculpt big to small, values big to small. Here's another one. So here's one more example for you of what this exercise looks like. So our portrait course, I'm so proud of it because we're really emphasizing the big to small sculpting, and we're spending a good amount of time on that process. And it's building people's really good habits, because we haven't even got to any features yet after 3 weeks of practice and work. This is where we're getting to. The way to join it is to join our study group, our membership. In the membership, you get the portrait course one-to-one feedback, plus all of our figure drawing stuff too, which is awesome. So check it out with the link below. And just so you know, there's another video up on the screen about portraits where you can learn even more about all of this. So check that out too. All right, and I'll see you over there.